So we have for this session 3, we have 4 interesting presentations in the afternoon. And I was just making a short welcome to Steve Ching from Run Shaw Library, Hong Kong, and Richard Wong from Lighthouse Heritage Research Connection, City University of Hong Kong. And your title is Using Digital Storytelling with Local History, Waglan Island, Lighthouse, and Father Fisherman in Hong Kong. So very welcome. Here is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steve Ching, and this is my colleague, Richard Wong. We came from City University of Hong Kong. It's our honor to be here and present at the oldest extant Catholic university for this special event to such remarkable people. First, I would like to share a short video about our Lighthouse project involving local history. And okay, we hope the video can work. It should be like this. Like this. So surely this. Okay, yes.
Hong Kong is a cosmopolitan city, growing up from the century-long maritime trade. Much of its historical heritage is inextricably tied to the oceans upon which it has thrived. Reflecting and symbolizing such heritage are the lighthouses along the Maritime Silk Road that stretches from Hong Kong all the way to Europe. The Run Shaw Library at City University of Hong Kong launched the Lighthouse Heritage Research Connections project 6 years ago. It has since served as a bridge that connected students and faculty members from such disciplines as architecture, civil engineering, translation, linguistics, history, and media studies. It has facilitated a fruitful sharing of the specialized talent, skills, and interests of those patrons. It has organized and managed discovery-enriched activities in which the participating patrons conducted research on different aspects of lighthouse heritage, transcribed and translated archival documents, created digital renderings and artworks, produced film documentaries, and worked as curators or general organizers of events and exhibitions. Exemplary of the research output of such a collaborative effort is a series of film documentaries with 3D.
Because it's a 3 minutes video, I try to just give you a background information about our project. And now there are 2 questions that we would like to address on. Number 1, what would students are willing to conduct research and create their digital storytelling output on heritage, on Lighthouse heritage outside of the classroom? And the number 2, what are the scholarly librarian or academic librarian go through this process? What's the role of the librarians throughout this process? That's today's presentation we want to address on. And this year marks the 130 years anniversary of the Waglan Island Lighthouse. We will show how three groups of students from different disciplines create their digital story output about this lighthouse, as well as the principal lighthouse keeper, Charles Farewell. He was born in Hong Kong. He is not just the lighthouse keeper. He created a human story, a big impact on our society. And the Waglan Island Lighthouse is located at a remote island, such as southeast of Hong Kong Island. It was built by Chinese Imperial Maritime Customs in 1893, and it was being occupied by British colonial government in 1901. In World War II, it was being controlled by Japanese government. In 1997, it was being handed over to China government. So you can see multiple shifts of administration of this lighthouse, and is a testimony of local history. The most famous principal lighthouse keepers of Waglan Island Lighthouse was Charles Farewell, who was known as father of fishermen in Hong Kong. He lived up the social status of fishermen in the 1950s and to 1980s. Now I will pass on to my colleague Richard and share our project in attempt to answer two questions: why and what? And I just have raised. I hope you will find it as fascinating as we did. Now, Richard, please.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Richard. It's an honor to be able to be here to present our experience with you all. To add a little bit more on the background of Waglan Island Lighthouse, this is the existing status of Waglan Island Lighthouse in Hong Kong. As you can see, because it's a declared monument, so it's free from any interference. But as you can see, is it well preserved and conserved? So I'll leave that to you to judge. And Charles Farewell, who is the principal lighthouse keeper of this Waglan Island Lighthouse, and also known as the father of the fishermen, he created a lot of recreation club for the fishermen, for them to unite and for their social activities, for them to manage their own affairs. So the logo at the left is one of the recreation club that he co-founded, which is in Chai Wan, a place in Hong Kong. And also the photo in the middle is that Charles Farewell, he taught the fishermen's children English, because at that time, it's very difficult for fishermen to receive any education, let alone English education. And Charles Farewell's children also played along with these fishermen's children. And this is Charles Farewell. He was the lighthouse keeper, and the one on his left was also a fisherman, a local fisherman in Hong Kong. So they were stationing in Waglan Island Lighthouse. Before I tell you against this background, how do we engage our students? Let me just show you a little bit of glimpse of what our students have done. First of all will be the documentary, which is we produced in 4 languages, in Cantonese, in Mandarin, in English, and in Japanese. So this one is an English version. So I'll just, because the length of this documentary is 20 odd minutes, so I'll just show you a portion, just to give you a glimpse.
This was once Asia's brightest lighthouse. It is located on the southeasternmost island of Hong Kong. Over the past century, Waglan Island Lighthouse has experienced more than 100 years of change in Hong Kong. It has also witnessed the integration of fishermen and land dwellers.
Okay, so this is the opening, and then I'll switch it to, let's see, 11:56. Okay, somewhere here.
Hua Wei Lu, who was the keeper of the Waglan Island Lighthouse, often sailed with the fishermen and organized various activities. Year after year, the Dragon Boat Race helped the development of a new integrated community of people on the sea and land. In 1971, the Queen of Britain conferred the MBE medal to Charles Farewell for his contribution to the fishermen.
She is the widow of Charles Farewell. And so I'll just have a little bit of the oral histories about Mary Thirlwell.
佢哋好似自己人一樣啦，咁參好多嘢都參加嘅，甚至咧拜山啊都跟埋佢哋去拜嗰啲fisherman 嗰啲公公婆婆嗰啲老人家，跟埋佢去拜山都有嘅，咁同嗰啲後生咧又有聯絡啦，夜晚黑咧佢放假翻嚟咧。 由朝到黑噶啦，同埋嗰啲 fisherman 啊，咁夜晚教嗰啲後生嘅嗰啲學生咧就補習英文啦，如果到嗰啲龍舟咧，咁佢就去參加嗰啲龍舟啊，同嗰啲fisherman 開會啊，點樣預備啊咁樣。
So this is the glimpse of the documentaries. And this is the first group of students who come from media and communications. And this group of students, they are actually come from architecture and civil engineering students and computer science students. So this is the Waglan Island Lighthouse metaverse. So based on the architectural drawings, which was drawn by the engineer-in-chief, a British, in the 19th century, he's hand-drawn. So architectural students translated the drawings into a digital one using the software Revit. And then the computer science students use that model to build this metaverse. Okay, so let me show you. And also, yep, so this is the interior of the Waglan Island Lighthouse. And so it will just be short clips, yeah. So you can see this is the lantern of the lighthouse. It can actually go out. As the real one, you can go out. Yeah, so that's about it of what the students have done. So I'll talk about how we engage our students. So basically we have this research cycle model, which is we mimic the actual research cycle, but this one was in circle because this is an ongoing project. So each year we will have new students participants, and they work on digital storytelling outputs based on the previous LHRC students, participants' research outputs. So this is actually a cycle. And the first stage is making observations. As you can see, we have 3 groups of students. Each one of them have their own observations. The first one is ACE, stands for Architecture and Civil Engineering. CS stands for Computer Science. And the COM stands for Media and Communication. And EE and LT, EE stands for Electrical Engineering students. And LT stands for Linguistics and Translations. So each one of them, they have their own observations. For example, the Electrical Engineering students, what does it have to do with Lighthouse? So in our previous exhibitions of lighthouses, we consciously incorporated inclusion in our exhibition. So we've made models, lighthouse models for the visually impaired and blind patrons to touch. But most of the time we have to need someone as students to explain the lighthouse, describe the lighthouse for them because they cannot see. So the electrical engineering students, they thought, how can they touch these lighthouses without any help? They can do it on their own. So this is just an observation they made. And also the architecture students, of course, they're interested in architecture information about the lighthouse, and media and communications about the history of lighthouse and the stories of these lighthouse keepers. So what is the librarian role? The librarian role is a storyteller, because these newcomers, They have absolutely no idea what the histories of lighthouses are, or the stories of lighthouse keepers. They have no idea. So we really need to be a storyteller to give them some background information first. And stage 2 is about collecting evidence. So these evidence, many of these evidence we collected, they're not in our subscribed databases. So they are scattered in other museums or institutions, or even in the community. So here we have this engineering drawings of Waglan Island Lighthouse, and which was now legally owned by the engineer-in-chief David Moore Henderson's great granddaughter, Felicity Summers Eve, but it was digitized by the University of Bristol. So each and every time when we need to clear the copyright issues, we have to clear the University of Bristol's and as well as Felicity's. And so these are all hand-drawn, all to the scale. So these are very magnificent evidence. And this one is also an evidence of Charles Thirlwell is indeed the father of the fisherman, because this is the dragon boat race competition trophy. So it's a big dragon boat. 50 more people will be on the same boat. Yeah, so this is in the community. So the librarian role is a consultant to connect the students with these sources of information. And also sometimes because they come from community, so librarian has to help the students to gain the copyright or to gain the trust from these community members. Students alone, they may not be able to have the creditability. So the librarian's role is to help them. And stage 3 is setting research inquiries. So each group of students, they have their own research inquiries. And librarian's role is co-teacher, because our project, we have all collaborating with the faculty members. So the librarian and the faculties, they're actually co-teaching the students on how to form an appropriate scope of investigation, because there's just so many things that they can cover. So librarian role is a co-teacher at this stage. And stage 4 is document their findings. As I've just said, the one on the left was actually the virtual reconstruction of the Waglan Island Lighthouse from a hand-drawn drawing to a digital drawing, and from the digital drawing to the metaverse. And also the documentaries, they have also recorded some of the oral histories. Actually, we have a longer version, but this is a documentary, so it should be enticing. So we have interviewed Charles Thirlwell's widow, his granddaughter, and the fisherman, as well as the great-grandson of David Moore Henderson. So he's James Summers Eve. And also the third group of students, this is the schematic design. So they designed a contactless RFID sensor model guidance, so that the students, the visually impaired patrons, they can actually touch the lighthouse. And when they touch at a point, it will link to their mobile phone apps, and then they will give them the guidance. But this is a schematic design, and the faculty members, they are trying their best to help the students to realize this, this design. So the librarian's role here is as a partner, because for each of these outputs, they have to measure up to a higher scholarly standard. So the faculties, the librarians really have to work on how to make sure that everything is correct. And so this is the librarian's role is a partner, because sometimes they need a lot of discussions, and sometimes the librarians don't know the answer. So we have to find out the answers together. And stage 5, which is the last stage, almost every year, we have an exhibition and publications so that the students' outputs, they're disseminated. So we usually partner with a Hong Kong Maritime Museum, because it brings relevance to the theme of the museum. And the librarian's role here is a partner as well, because it is usually in a museum, the venue, the exhibition venue, they're usually for a rent. So they usually need money. But here, the students need to write up their own proposals, and the librarians help them to submit them to the Hong Kong Maritime Museum. And so in the proposal, they must demonstrate what have they done, what is the value, what is the relevancy to the Hong Kong Maritime Museum. So what are the values to society and community at large? So the possibilities in future, because during the process, the library or the students, we've collected a lot of primary sources data. And also these students' outputs, as long as they're supervised, this can be really, really good quality. And we want to preserve and disseminate them in the future. But in Hong Kong as CityU, previously in 2005, we have OAPS, which is Outstanding Academic Papers by Students. But these students' work, they're all in textual form. We have not developed a system that could archive these students' outputs, which are born digital, which are in various media formats. Of course, the newest is the metaverse. We still have not yet developed this kind of system. So we can consider to improve them because we're seeing the trend, right? The metaverse and various media formats. So to conclude, Steve has just raised two questions. Why are these students willing to spend their time extracurricular? It has almost nothing to do with their formal curriculum, their assignments. Why would they want to do that? It's because they're making original discoveries. All these discoveries, they're original. These outputs are original. And also, when we disseminate their outputs in the community, they receive a lot of positive feedback from the community. This is their drive. So that sometimes they even has to push the librarian, hey, give me some more information. I want to make it more informative. So I think that this is the reason why Housefield engage young people to use these local history materials and to be, so they can be valuable education materials. So it depends on how librarians, faculties, how to collaborate together and how to make them very useful to the students. And the librarian, so basically we have various different roles, but he's the prime facilitator to connect everybody, so to have a focus and to produce outputs that everybody will appreciate. And to conclude, also, we have these two. This is actually a very significant contributions to the students because the Waglan Island Lighthouse, even the Hong Kong government records, they do not know this architecture, this station plan. So actually, the students, when they come up with this station plan, they try to pinpoint the architecture or the buildings of this Waglan Island Lighthouse station, and also. Originally, this station plan, it has only the number, but without the index. But we have to put it into context. This Waglan Island Lighthouse was actually a twins lighthouse with another lighthouse in China, which is in Dalian. So they're twins lighthouse. So that we have to refer to the lesson, the station plan of the Dalian Laotieshan Lighthouse. And then they've come up with this index. So to show that the original function of each and every building. And also the students have been finding it very, very encouraging when they conducted a talk in a primary school to talk about Hong Kong historical lighthouses. So these are primary school students' works. So of course, they cannot manipulate the very advanced softwares, but they've tried their best to draw the lighthouses and to write what they've learned from the talk. And also, they've also done some reflection on how the community at large should make good use of these lighthouses. So it's been very encouraging and exciting opportunity for not only the students, participants, but also to the librarians. So we're really making an impact to our society. This is one of the major drives that we're willing to continue this project. This is for my presentation, and thank you very much.
If somebody has a short question, otherwise we take it in the after all in the elder sessions because we have an after schedule.
Well, my question is, would you please a little more explain to the what type of the student? This project is a part of the classroom or not? Yeah, and student is restricted to the subject of they are learning to the library science or not?
Students
Student meaning.
come from the faculty. They recommend because we will promote this project in each faculty, and the faculty will recommend the student to us. So we interview students and so see if match. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's when the student willing to do this. It's not that we invite them. So we have to go through the interview process. Yes.
Yeah, it's out of the classroom.
Extracurricular.
And they don't get the money. So we just try to help them to get the funding. For example, they visit the Lighthouse. They have to pay the not transportation fee. We try to get the permission from the government. So they are really appreciate. They have the real world experience to conduct the research. So money is not the key. Of course, it's necessary. But librarian can do the things, not the money only. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. So for the next presentation, it's Gaetan Boisson from the National University of Singapore. Now we will go underground. The title is Revealing the Bukit Brown Cemetery Underground Artifacts. So welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Gaetan, and I work at the National University of Singapore as the principal librarian for digital scholarship. Now I'm going to tell you about this project that we are currently doing, revealing the Bukit Brown Cemetery underground artifacts. And at the end of the presentation, I hope to get a few minutes to show you the current working prototype. So maybe I will start with a few words about Singapore. I suppose you've all heard about Singapore and maybe even have been here. So it's famous for being described as a garden city, but it's also very famous for its very, very fast development in the last half century. It's a very small country, of course, with 734 square kilometers. So for comparison here, I've put Belgium since we're in Belgium today. Belgium is 41 times bigger, but only has twice the population of Singapore. One fun fact to note here is that the surface, the land area of Singapore has actually increased in the last 10 years because Singapore does a lot of land reclamation. And on this small island, so 21% of the land is considered forested. So here's a map of Singapore. So Malaysia is here at the top on the east, and the south here we can see a little bit of Indonesia. And this is the island of Singapore itself, with this red circle here in the middle being the location of the Bukit Brown Cemetery, which we're interested in today. So as you see, we do have a lot of green areas for a country this size. It's not so bad, but of course, the very, very fast development and the needs of the industrial developments and life in Singapore means that we have a lot of infrastructure being built up. And even on this map, you can already see a lot of roads and highways all over the island. And well, it's interesting because the location we're talking about, the cemetery, is right in the middle. So it's obviously a pretty strategical spot for transportation. So about the cemetery and its history. So as you might know, Singapore is a very diverse country with a lot of different ethnicities, but the majority, I think 70% is Chinese. And the Chinese community had been lobbying for dedicated cemetery in this area in Bukit Brown since 1914. So this is not the only Chinese cemetery in Singapore, of course, but this was an important location and it opened in 1923. was with a surface of 173 acres. Burial ceased in 1973. And in 2011, the government announced plans to build a highway in order to alleviate some of the traffic issues in the central region of Singapore. Plans were made, and it was decided that a highway would go over the cemetery, which required, well, to destroy some parts of the location. So here you have a map of the location today. This is from OpenStreetMap. So you see the whole area of the cemetery here, and it goes a bit higher here. And this part here in pink is the Lornie Highway. This is the highway that was built following this decision. Here there's a little bit of housing here, but most of it is this forest. For more context, I have here an historical map from 1975. So before the highway was built, we had this road, Lornie Road, which you can see here, but which cannot accommodate as much traffic as the highway. And here the cemetery is signed here. More interesting, so this is from the library's collection of digitized historical maps. And so we had this historical map from 1975, but we also have aerial photographs that were shot in 1950. And this is really interesting because here you can see the cemetery, and what you can see here is a very different landscape from what is to be seen today. So the land is a lot more clean and organized. This looks a lot more like a cemetery. So if you want, you can go have a look on Google Maps later. Today, the area is very, very lush. It's a proper wild forest because the cemetery is not in use anymore. So we still have tombs, and there are lots of volunteers keeping these tombs in good condition, but the area is mostly forested. So the project we are talking about today has a long history because when the government decided to build this highway, this drew immediate attention from the general public, of course, and local initiatives started very, very soon to preserve the site. So these initiatives involved tours. We still have regular tours offered of the location since it's such a pleasant spot with a lot of vegetation and also a lot of historical relevance. And these volunteers have also been taking care of keeping the site in good condition and also documenting the site itself. So there's been initiatives that started at the time to document all the tombs, especially the tombs that were threatened by the project, and archive them in websites or other formats. And there's already been some research that was published about the topic. So here, what comes at play for us is the notion of folk culture in Singapore. If you've been to Singapore, it's an interesting place because it's very, very developed, and it's probably what you will be struck by the most when you first arrive. And despite this, there's a lot of layers of cultures and traditional cultures that are hidden in plain sight. And what's particularly interesting here is that we have this unique Chinese customs and funerary rites with a population that is not necessarily very close to this anymore. So the younger population of Singapore is very westernized. The Chinese youth will probably speak Mandarin because they have mandatory classes on the mother tongue. But what I can tell you from the conversation I have with friends is that they're usually not very involved in this aspect of their identity. So here there's a lot of folk culture that deserve to be preserved and showcased, especially if we want the population to be able to relate to this history that is being slowly erased in a country where space is extremely sparse, and the government is always trying to find new places to develop housing, for instance. So what happened is that we started working on the artifacts that were unearthed in the tombs that were destroyed. Since this custom is, so I'm not Chinese, as you might be able to tell. So what I understand of the custom is that during the burial, objects will be buried with the deceased for them to take with them in the other realm. And so we have these objects that were gathered from the tombs, and they are often in a pretty bad state of disrepair because they are being buried. This is what these objects are used for, and it's pretty hard to preserve them in good condition. But on top of this, it's associated with cultural taboos, and we need to make sure that the family of the deceased is okay with us reusing this item. So even not being Chinese, I can perfectly imagine that if someone was to come on my grandfather's tomb and pick up something from the tomb to put it in their kitchen because they think it's nice, I would not appreciate it that much. So these cultural taboos translate actually pretty well across all cultures, I guess, even though the items that we're about to see are, of course, extremely Chinese, and the practice of burying them with the dead is pretty specific to this culture. So what was done, so this is before the part of the project where I come in, was to digitize these artifacts. So I think it was 500 items that were cataloged by the volunteers, and only 22 were selected on a number of criteria, one of them being we are actually allowed to use these objects. And the principal investigator for this project, Natalie Pang, at the time, worked with a grant from the National Heritage Board to digitize these artifacts through a photogrammetry process. And so 22 items, out of these 22 items, 3D models were produced. So hundreds of pictures of each item are taken, and then some dedicated software will put them together in a model. And this is the part where I picked up. So now we have these 22 items that are digitized, and we want to showcase them to the public and engage the audience, and specifically possibly a younger audience that has a more tenuous link to this aspect of the culture with these items and the story of the cemetery. So we had to work with these 3D models and make sure we would be able to reuse them for our project. So the photogrammetry process will produce very large files. So I'm not going to get into the technical details of 3D models, but working with a large number of images, we will get a model that has a lot of polygons, a lot of data points for the volume. And so by nature, the process will be very noisy. So like all aspects of conservation and digitization, some information gets lost, and actually information gets transformed. The representation we're looking at is just a representation, just like a map. And so a lot of choices have to be made. Here, what I worked on is that we considered the result of the photogrammetry to be good for archival, but not for displaying this to a general audience on the web. And we had to optimize these models by reducing the polygon count and optimizing the textures so that they would display faster on the website. This is still an ongoing work to make the website fast enough for a general audience. Now with every story, we need to add some context. So when we started building up this story, we only had the 3D models, and we found that it was a bit hard. It was still a bit hard to engage. So of course, it's already interesting to see 3D objects on the web page and to add some details in the story. But we found that generally everything seemed very lackluster. And the idea we came up with was to use our historical maps to put the objects into context. So we took the geospatial data of our historical maps, and we layered it with the elevation data of the islands, and in the 3D software Blender, we put this together to create a 3D model of the island itself with the details of the map. And so what we did was to layer a map of the whole country and those aerial photographs, so that especially for the area we're interested in, for Bukit Brown, we would have something pretty realistic about how the area looked like at the time when this was a cemetery and it was in use. So we put this all together in order to tell a story, and then we worked on the storytelling itself. So we have our objects, we have the context, and now we need to tell a story with all of this. So in order to make things a bit more engaging for the audience, we added some lighting so that the relief, the terrain would stand out more. And we added, so this is a bit funny, but we have these little lights here. I wanted to find a way to show the exact location of the cemetery. If you don't know where the cemetery is located on this map, you don't know where it stops. So I added these fireflies over the area to draw the attention of the viewer to the area of the cemetery itself. And the objects, as you will see, will rotate also to allow the user to see all the angles. And finally, to really drive the story and get a more linear narrative to it so that people would remain engaged with the content. We have what we call scroll-driven interaction. So as you scroll down the page, the story will unfold and different items will be shown. So of course, this was a pretty technical project to implement. It is a pretty technical project. I won't get too much into the details. So our focus at the library at the National University of Singapore is sustainability of our projects. If you know about it, there was this project called the Endings Project that details requirements for sustainable website to minimize maintenance requirements. So we are adhering to these principles as much as possible. And the technology we are using for this project is a static site generator called Astro, a framework called Svelte for what we call reactivity and state management. For the 3D graphics, we need to use WebGL. And for this, we are using 3GS and Svelte, which is the connection between 3 and Svelte. And lastly, for the motion design, so when things move around the screen, when the camera has movements, to design all this interaction, we're using something called Theater.js. Now, our plan and possible hurdles. So the plan is to put this live before the end of the year. We have now a pretty solid prototype. The full story will be uncovered then. So what I have to show today, what is okay for me to show, does not have any elements of the story. For the assets themselves, there will be a dedicated system to preserve them. So what we're working on is really the storytelling, the way to engage users, but it's not something that is meant for preserving digital assets. And the last and biggest hurdle is in the midterm, there is a possibility that the API that is used for 3D graphics on the web will be deprecated, which means that despite our commitment to keep things as maintainable as possible, we can foresee that in the midterm, there would be some maintenance to keep things working. That's it for my presentation. Thank you very much. If I have a few minutes, I'd like to show the website. 5 minutes, it's more than enough. So I really don't need 5 minutes to show you. Go right now. Okay, please. Yeah. Okay, so